This interview is a part of the Oklahoma Historical Society's Oral History Program, Living Legends Collection. This interview was originally conducted in May of 1972. The interview was conducted by Mr. Pendleton Woods. The interviewee is Mrs. C.O. Davis, or Mrs. Anna Davis, of Bartlesville, Oklahoma. This material was re-recorded on October the 8th, 1987 for inclusion in the permanent collections of the Oral History Program by Judith Michener.
This is Penn Woods interviewing for the Oklahoma Living Legends, and the date is May 1972 in Bartlesville, and we're visiting with Mrs. C.O. Davis, and your given name is
Anna.
Anna Davis, and you are you're of Indian origin. What tribe are you?
Delaware.
Delaware tribe. Ms. Davis, I wonder if you just kind of take the mic and we'll just talk along. I wonder to begin with if you would tell us who your parents were and where they were born, if they were born in this area or elsewhere, and where you were born, how you came into this area.
Well, both my parents were born here after the Delawares migrated from Kansas, and my mother was Josie Bullitt, and my father was Samuel Anderson. So that way, they were born here. And I was born 3 miles north and about 3/4 of a mile east of Dewey. And I've lived here all of my life. I didn't have sense enough to leave. But I was one of those children that I was always visiting aunts, this aunt and this grandma, and finally my mother and father separated, so eventually my mother let me stay with her mother. So I grew up with my grandparents, and so that way my grandfather's name, it was mother's stepfather, and his name was Brown, so a lot of times people referred to me as Miss Brown, and so many years they didn't know exactly who I was. But I grew up in this neighborhood and went to school here, and I was just in fact, I was a tomboy. I never liked to do things that girls do, and my grandmother used to be kind of provoked about that, but I know when I was big enough to go to school, my grandfather took me to Chilocco, and I wasn't quite 6 yet, but apparently in those days they'll take anybody that wants to go to school. So I went to Chilocco the first term, stayed there the whole year. And in that length of time, I forgot my own language. And when I got home, I had to learn it all over. And it was quite, when I think of it now, it was comical. I talk English to my grandmother, and she'd talk Delaware to me. And but it must have taken me, say, maybe 3 weeks to learn it all over again. It was mother's cousin, a man. He was always visiting with us, and if I saw him coming first, I'd go hide, because the minute he stepped in the house, he'd say, "Where's your little white girl?" And that embarrassed me, so I'd hide from him all the time. And then next place I went to school, I went to school in Dewey a while. And then I was about 9 years old. I went to school at Haskell, and I was going to school there when Indian Territory became state. And so that way I do remember that was a special occasion to me when I went to school there. And I went to school there 2 terms. And then being a pet and the grandchild of the family, if I didn't like a school, all I had to do was tell Grandpa I was homesick or I was sick, and come after me. so that way I done well to get to page 9 in the third reader. And but from that time on, I went to various schools here in Dewey. And then I went to school in Dewey from 1989 till February 1912. And the schoolhouse burned down. It was a new schoolhouse. I had gone to the little old stone schoolhouse that was built, I don't remember when, but I did go there for a while. And then I didn't go to school for a whole month. And my guardian came out one day and told me, says, you better go to school. He said, you have to go to school or you'll have the authorities coming out here and putting me in jail because you don't go to school. So I told him I'd go to Pahuska then. I had a younger sister that was going to school over at Pahuska at the sister school, you know. I went there and spent the last 3 years of my school life there. And I really enjoyed it. I've told several of my friends that if I had gone there sooner, I might have been a smart person nowadays. But then that was 1914. Well, I got married then in October of 1914, on the verge of going to Tulsa, to what was known as Kendall College. But I got married instead, so that just chopped off everything. In those days, when you got married, you were supposed to be a married woman and stay at home. So that's what I did. And we've lived in this community, well, all our lives. We didn't farm, but my grandfather had renters on the farm. We lived on his allotment, and grandmother's joined his. My own allotment and my uncle's was way down on River Bottom, where it used to overflow all the time. But we lived on grandfather's allotment after we were married. After he passed away, we moved out there because grandmother wouldn't move to town with us. So we moved out there with her, and we lived out there for 7 years. And then we moved to town. And the next...
Which town was it? Dewey or Bartles?
Dewey.
Dewey.
Uh-huh. And we'd move back out to farm, then we'd move back to town. We did that for about 7 years or 8, something like that. We finally decided to stay in town so my 2 older children could go to school. The boy was going to school, then the next year my daughter followed. So we've lived in and around Dewey all this time. And then I have my 2 older children were 8 and 9 years old. No, 8 and 10 years old, I believe. I'll get it right pretty soon. And then I have a second set of family. I have 4 boys in a row. And of course we stayed right in Dewey. I told them when they were going to school, I said, you're going to go to school. You'll go to school if you're just ready to fall, drop dead. You've got to go to school. So they all did. They really enjoyed it. And so today they're all, 3 of them are college graduates, and the other one did go to college 2 years. So that way I really enjoyed my 4 boys. Then when my youngest son he was 6, going on 7, I had a little girl. And she was quite a thing because the whole family just adored her, the boys especially. And she grew up just being a little tomboy like I was, because whatever the boys did, she did. And she grew up that way, just being a little tomboy. But she graduated from Dewey School, and then she went to Edmond. And she graduated out of Edmond and in 3.5 years. And I remember when she was getting ready to go to school, the boys were kind of kidding her, says, oh, you'll get homesick, you'll be coming home bawling. But she told them, she says, I'm going, and I'm not going to go to school all my life. I'm getting out in 3.5 years. And she did. So then after she did her trial teaching in Edmond, she went into Oklahoma City and taught there. for a year and a half, and then the last year that she was going to go to Nevada to teach out there. And the morning she was coming home, she was supposed to be bridesmaid for one of her roommates, and she had a car accident, and she was killed in that accident on the spring of '63.
Why don't you describe Dewey as you first remember it, what it
Well,
looked like?
my first recollections of Dewey was the Dewey Hotel and what was known as the Pioneer Building. It was the Bartles store first, then later it became the Pioneer Building. But at the other north end from the hotel was another store, and it was called Thomas's store. It was a little general store too. But the hotel has always been the main interest of Dewey.
Can you think of any events that happened during your early period that are particularly memorable in Dewey, events in the town?
Well, I think what things that are stand out in a child's mind is Christmas. I think my first Christmas and the first Christmas tree I saw was up over this Bartles store rather, and I remember we went up there, my mother and Grandma Wilson and another lady that lived with them, and that room was just packed, so we finally found seats way over by the window rather, and it was the hotel was the north of this building. So, of course, I didn't speak English and didn't understand English, so that way what they said and the program didn't interest me at all, so I sat there looking out the window, watching the people passing down on the street. And then then all at once somebody shook me, and I turned around, and it was Santa Claus looking at me. And I was really frightened because I had never seen a Santa Claus before, and he scared me, and he handed me a little doll. And I guess I took it, I don't remember, but I know I was quite frightened with that white beard, And so Mother told me, she said, "Oh, this is supposed to be Santa Claus." Well, it didn't make no impression on me, he just scared me. So that way they always had these Christmas celebrations and everything like that in that hall upstairs. And on this one occasion too, Grandma Wilson and I went over to visit Mrs. Bartles at the hotel at her apartment. And I remember she picked up a doll. Oh, it looked like an enormous doll to me, but I don't suppose it was over, 12, 14 inches tall, But to me, it was an enormous doll. And I remember we walked over to the hall, and I was just wishing that she would give me that doll, but I don't remember seeing who got that doll, but it was a pretty thing. I can just see how it was dressed and all that. But another thing I remember about this hotel, there used to be a boardwalk on two sides, the south side and the east side. And sometimes we'd stop at the Thomas's store and walk on south to the Bartles store. Well, on one occasion, Grandmother had got me a sack of candy, and this boardwalk did have some broken boards in it, and she told me, she said, "You better quit running, you'll fall down, break your sack." Well, she hadn't more than told me that till I fell down. Oh, I was so disappointed because half the candy went down under the walk, and I couldn't get it. But that's one of the funny things that happened to me because I was doing something that I shouldn't have done. And then another thing that I remember about the store, it was up high so that people could drive their buggies and wagons and just step right out of the wagon onto the platform. And the boards, Grandmother would always give me a nickel. And when we get there, she always had, tray of the eggs, and in those days you could get 2 bananas for a nickel. So with this nickel, I'd buy me 2 bananas. And half the time, maybe if they gave me another nickel, I'd go to, just playing around, running on that porch, and I'd drop my nickel and it'd fall down through those cracks. That was such a terrible disaster, losing my last nickel, because I would think that I would buy 2 more bananas and take them home.
How, you're of the Delaware tribe, were there any tribal events, celebrations?
Oh, yes.
Tell about them.
Well, one of our, now for instance, our big house meetings, we always held it in the fall, and it was, this was built, it was a log house, made with logs, and I remember my very first recollection of seeing that building. I was about 8 years old, I think, and it's located west of Copan. Of course, it's not there now, but at that time it was west of Copan, and each fall of the year, in the latter part of October or the 1st of November, we would have our church for 12 days and 12 nights, and everybody would come and camp, and the services, we'd always have services at night, and seemed like later on, though, every time they would have it, I'd be away at school, so that way I never got to go too many times until after I was grown, and I went twice or 3 times to the meetings, and seemed like after that, though our older men, that could carry the services and knew the rules of the services, passed away, so that way we just finally had to just quit having our services, and the building eventually people got to tearing it down. See, they had these faces on the inside, and they were just tried as trophies, and they just tore those down, and there was one post that held up the whole building, in the middle, center, and it had it was, I think, about, somebody said 24-inch square log that was hewed, and the 2 faces on it, and these were the faces, symbols of God, but the building isn't there, and I think Mr. Endicott has 2 of those faces that he happened to be able to get before they were completely destroyed and decayed.
Can you think of any other tribal events that might be of interest?
Well, they used to have a little, during the blackberry time, they used to have what they call a doll dance, and it was on the ceremonial order too, and it was kind of a Thanksgiving dance, same as the big house dances were, and they always had it just about the time the blackberries are ripe in the summertime, and it consisted of so many dances, but it was just a one-night affair, one evening and night, and it was always put on by the same family, and it was a traditional doll that they always had at the ceremonies, but those were finally, had to be discontinued because there was no one that knew the songs, so we don't have those anymore.
What were some of the memorable events or situations from the standpoint of the community that you recall over the years that you feel would be worth mentioning?
Well, there's a pioneer, Indian Territory Pioneer Association.
Tell about this, Arthur.
Well, I think it was started in 1915, somewhere along in there, and they used to be quite a large organization, and people, just all over the Indian Territory would come, bring their dinners, and then the association would furnish beans and coffee, and then the rest of the dinner was you bring your picnic baskets, and so that way we used to come to that. And then I was president 1 year of the organization, 2 years I guess it was, and then I was secretary for the association for 7 years. And we still have it now, but our membership has really fallen down till, I guess might be about 125 yet. Boy, it used to be about 300 and 400, you know.
Can you think of anything unusual or interesting or highlight that happened during one of these events, Indian events?
No, I don't.
What about people you have known who have played a role of any sort in history that might be mentioned? People you personally may know.
I really don't know of anybody that's very. I just really don't think of anybody outside of who everybody knows.
What are the things you mentioned, the Pioneer Association, but what are some of the things that you have had a part in yourself over the years?
Well, I'm historian of the Pioneer Association right now. Then we have an Indian Women's Club in our community here that it's all Indian women, and I've been president of that and secretary and various positions in the Indian Women's Club, and we are still operating, and our purpose of our Indian Club is to help Indian students that want to further their education, like nursing, or just anything that they want to major in, you know. So that way we have 2 students now in training and 1 music student that is graduating. And then we help our needy families that we know of, and we have a membership of 64 members right now in our Indian Women's Club.
You're a historian of the Pioneer Women's Club. Tell us some of the history that you've recorded in this project. Some of the events.
Well, in our it's the Pioneer Association that I'm the historian of. Well, and on one occasion, Governor Murray came to visit us.
Tell about that.
I don't remember just what year that was, but he came and spoke to us, and it was quite an affair. Everyone was quite anxious to meet Governor Murray, and he gave us a talk. And then
Which Governor Murray was that?
the younger man.
Johnson.
Uh-huh.
Do you remember what he said?
No, I don't. I sure don't remember that. But I know it rained. I said that he should have come sooner because we had a very dry summer.
He was the first governor with Indian blood, I believe, Governor Murray.
Governor Murray? Oh,
Johnson,
maybe so. I
that's
really
right.
don't know. I had my picture taken with him. That's a wonderful thing. But then, I don't know. There's so many little things that happen that really don't, to my notion, isn't so terribly important. I know Mr. Bartles was always in Gunner Lane.
How about Mr. Bartles?
Well,
I can't remember.
I remember him as sort of aloof, and he was such a picturesque-looking man, and I never was very well acquainted with him. In fact, was a child, I was afraid of him. You know, like a child is kind of strange to. But he and my husband were quite good friends. My husband worked for him for several years before we were married. And so that way he got acquainted with all of his relatives, so that way he was kind of a really home folks around here before I married him.
Listen, Mr. Bartles, was Bartlesville named after him or his father?
His father.
After his father. What did his father do? I mean, what was what caused the town to be named after his father?
Well, I think he really was one of the first people to do very intensive operations like logging, walnut timber, and farming wheat in larger areas, and that way he, helped a lot of people. Now, for instance, our colored folks, didn't have much to do in the way of learning a living, so he employed the colored folks, I should say Negro folks or black people, and that way they all just thought Mr. Bartles would just be one person. Then he started the little store, and it was known in the Bartles store for years and years, a few years after he passed away. And that way he helped the community by. And then I remember when they was moving the Pioneer building from across the creek of Bartlesville here, and it seemed like this Mr. Keeler and Mr. Johnstone, either one of them or maybe both of them worked for Mr. Bartles over there when he had his first store. And then they came over this side of the river and built them a store, so that kind of upset their relationship, so Mr. Bartles moved his store on up to Dewey. I don't remember anything about it. I've heard my people talk about it so much that I always just felt like I was right there and saw it all, but I don't remember. My first recollection of it is being up there at Dewey, but I'd heard people talk about it so much that I just always felt like I was right there and saw it all and took part in it.
Can you think of anything else that we ought to?
Oh, I don't know. I think I think I've told you everything that I.
Everything you know is on those sheet of paper.
Yeah.
Let's see if there's anything you have on a sheet that we have to talk about.
No, I told you about the statehood day and the big house meeting and my various activities in club work. Beyond that, I just been a homebody and raised a large family, and they've enjoyed my.
How big a family?
I have 5 sons and had 2 daughters, and of course my youngest daughter was killed in this accident.
Yes.
But then I have 5 grandsons and 3 granddaughters.
Did you talked about statehood? What about the Sequoia? The Sequoia Convention and the talk about 2 states, which was the original thinking of some people.
Mm-hmm.
Did you hear any of that, or did?
Well, I've just read about it, but
You were pretty young then.
Oh yes, that's what I said. I just what I have heard my people
Yes.
talk about, and but to say I know, because I don't. Now, take for instance when the Delawares were getting signed up to get our payment, there were so many people that had relatives, but they didn't know just exactly what relation they were, and they would come to me, and I said, well, I just really didn't know. I said I didn't have good sense till 1906 and 7. Before that, I said it was just hearsay. I'd hear it, but I couldn't say I know it. So,
Sure.
so that way I know it used to aggravate me when I go telling something. They'd say, "Oh, you don't know. You're too young." I told them I was getting up there now. I can say I know so and so, but I do remember they used to kind of tease me about that.
Can you think of anything else that we ought to regard?
Well, I don't know of anything important, but I do remember I was telling my aunt about something, and I was telling her all about how the Bartles store looked. It was founded as in mud, halfway between here and Dewey, for I guess about 4 or 5 months. Well, I heard them tell about it so much, even the planks that go from the dry to over this mud puddle to get into the store. And I was telling my aunt about it one day, and I was telling these people at her house, and she was sitting at the other end of the table, and she said, "My, you was a smart baby. You was setting up about that time." I said, so ever since that, I never said I know. I just say I think or I heard these things that happened. But
Of course, you've lived a lot now, so you can claim that you know
yes,
it.
I do. I do know some of these things now. And I do remember when you used to cross the Caney River coming over here to Bartlesville. in the wagon, you know. And it used to be so pretty and clear you could just see the fish down in the water. That I did experience that because that was long before they had the bridge. I was 4 or 5 years old, I guess, when all this happened. But I believe that's about all I can.
Well, thank you. This has been an interview in May 1972 with Mrs. C. O. Davis in Bartlesville. Thank you very much, Ms. Davis.